The Trick to Money is Having Some by Stuart Wilde, read by Zy Gray. This recording is for educational purposes only. Money is a thought form. It is a symbol of energy, and as such, it has no real intrinsic value. It is neither good nor bad, positive nor negative. It is impartial. The guy who wrote that money is the root of all evil just flat out didn't have any. You can't make it through the physical plane without it. And whereas sometimes the love of money can cause people to become evil and weird, it is a fact that without money, you cannot be free. Poverty is restriction. And as such, it is the greatest injustice you can perpetrate upon yourself. Dollar Dance Concept 1. Abundance will never be a factor of how much money one has. Rather, it is always a factor of how one feels about what money one does have. Yet, when you look at nature and you see the abundance and flow that are naturally a part of our environment, it is hard to understand why people take up poverty as a way of life. It seems that in order to be poor, a person has to work so hard. It takes a constant effort of mind to avoid the abundance that life offers naturally. In the same way that joy is natural and God-given, so too is abundance. Everything else is a drag. If you were to carefully analyze the feelings of a tramp and a mega millionaire, you would be amazed to find only a very slight variation in how each feels about abundance. Then, if you took a look at the people you know and compare their successes to failures, you will again find that the difference between them is only that of thought form. The successful ones started off as failures, and then one day they changed their minds and never looked back. What are we looking at in this book is, how are you going to change your feelings so that you make lots of money quickly, reclaim your power, and trot off into the sunset absolutely free? By the time you reach the end of this book, I hope you will agree that the acquisition of money is not a serious business. It's a game that you play. At first, it may seem that it is a game that you play with forces outside of yourself, the economies of the marketplace, so to speak. But as you proceed, you discover that it is actually a game you play with yourself. How you play that game affects the quality of your life and determines the extent to which you can liberate yourself. To liberate yourself, you have to review what it is you believe about abundance and finances so that you can fashion an appropriate battle plan that will take you from struggle into flow, from skimpy into lush. Now, if you have any thoughts about money not being spiritual, I hope that by the end of this book, I will have pummeled them out of you because the idea is absolutely ludicrous. It is a handy ego trip for all those who are too apathetic to do anything about their condition. I believe that in life, we are all on a quest. You may not necessarily describe your life in those terms, but I believe we are here to understand ourselves. That means physical body, intellect, emotions, spirituality, sexuality, love, motherhood, joy, fatherhood, and cash. You have to have it. Otherwise, the tail wags the dog. The whole trick to money is having some. There's really nothing else to it. That might sound a bit glib, but only to a person who doesn't have any money. If you have money, you will know that how you got it was by having it. I will explain that subtly at another time. Okay, onward and upwards. There are loads of ways to becoming rich. Let us eliminate some of the obvious ones so we can concentrate on those circumstances in which most of us find ourselves. First, you can inherit it. But if you are not born into a wealthy family, acquiring relatives who are loaded is not a simple process, although it's not impossible. You can be adopted. You can hang out with wealthy folk and become so very valuable to them and affect their feelings so dramatically that they consider you a relative even though you are not. You could marry into money. Perhaps you already have, and the fellow keeled over after a year or so, and you're sitting on a beach in Hawaii sipping margaritas, simply saying, simple, really? Of course, you could become rich by stealing the money. That achieves the end result for you, but with it comes certain nasty implications. You would be a little disappointed to discover that once you had filched the million you set your heart on, it did not, in fact, set you free. Most likely, you would find yourself in an emotional trap of constantly listening for footsteps up the stairs, wondering when the heat was going to show. Further, if you steal the money, it has karmic implications And as the money came easily to you, there will be a tendency for you to let it go the same way. Life has a balance of its own. A man I knew committed with others one of the most famous robberies in the history of British crime. His mates were caught and went to prison, but he remained a free man because of an incredible fluke. The police made a clerical error in their investigation and got his identity confused with another's. So, as the case wrapped up, the police were satisfied they had all the perpetrators under lock and key. Yet, in the confusion, my friend got away. The pack of money he stole, however, brought him no comfort, and eventually he drifted into drugs and became a heroin addict. Whatever became of him, I do not know. But when I last saw him, his condition was pitiful and his life a disaster. The problem with theft is that it is an affirmation of lack. It affirms that you do not believe that you have it and that you have it in you to play the game of life and do well no matter what. The motivations of larceny are so destructive. They carry with them an implied disease that eventually shows up in the thief's life as weakness and causes him or her misery. In a world where there are so many crooks and chiselers, where so often people are out to make a quick buck, it is satisfying to set rules for oneself that are honorable and fair. Perhaps by living by these rules, the point of your eventual financial freedom is delayed somewhat. But in reaching it eventually, you can look back and see that each step added to the goodness of the world, and each move allowed you to become a better human being. The reason why making money is such a joy is that it allows you to grow spiritually, to understand the finer subtleties of life, and to come to grips with many aspects of yourself. This does not imply that rich people are necessarily spiritual, but it does infer that poor people probably are not. Of course, if you get up and say that to an audience, a dozen people will protest and say, what about someone like Mother Teresa? The fact that Mother Teresa was sold in the PR package as this little old dear who didn't have any money, but was doing good things for the Lord and the indigent of India. On one level, that may have been true, and no one can argue that the folk of Bombay desperately needed her services. But if truth be known, Mother Teresa was a multi-million-dollar business that was supported by the massive wealth and power of the Catholic Church. She formed a pivotal part in the merchandising of their philosophy and the solicitation of money. She was a business. She used her enthusiasm and energy to hit up the church or the Indian government or whoever she could for cash, which she converted into resources. Basically, she was a distributor with a multi-million-dollar budget and plenty of free labor that she was happy to use to materialize her plan. The fact that she was a good person cannot be denied, but it is also a fact that Mother Teresa was a shrewd old bird who knew how to turn a buck or two. She worked for an organization that supports a massive PR budget and that knows the game inside and out. Her church has more resources and a greater net worth than does General Motors. To use her as an example of poverty being spiritual is to buy the PR and not the facts. Spiritual means integration with the God force in all things. And since the God force is abundant, it is impossible to consider oneself truly integrated if one does not have the same qualities as the God force. All philosophies that teach that poverty is groovy do so as a cop-out. It keeps the non-performing members happy, for they can live in the ego trip of thinking that somehow their lack of creativity and effort will be blessed at a later date. I think they are in for a rude awakening, but that is irrelevant. What is important is that you agree with yourself that what you are going to contribute to the world is energy. One of those forms of energy is money. Money that you can give away, money that you can empower others, money that you can use to make the world a better place, money to set you free. Of course, money is only one form of abundance. There is also the abundance of happiness and love, of opportunity, of friendship, but it is often true that a person who is lacking money is also lacking in other forms of abundance. It is various aspects of their feelings that cut them off from supply. As we said, the difference between having money and not having it is not great. It is a very small but subtle shift in consciousness. That's all. You can see it clearly on a large scale by watching corporations that are doing fine one minute, making 50 to 100 million a year. Then the next day, there is a small shift someplace and they are paying more for their materials, getting less in return, and what they have is not as valuable as it was the day before. Suddenly, they are losing 10 million a month. Watching money at the level shows you how a small shift can make a huge difference. The name of the game is to shift yourself to the positive side and step up and collect. Of course, people who don't have money will tell you that the world is short of the stuff. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, on any given working day, there are many hundred millions of dollars created that were not there 24 hours earlier. To get into action, you only have to agree to play the game, the rules of which were written some time ago. You may have to adapt the game, you may have to adapt to how the game is played. But once you understand that it's a game and agree to join, it is only a matter of time before the system declares you in. Now, if you do not currently see yourself as part of great wealth, think of this. Most large financial transactions travel by satellite communications. Billions of dollars are flying through the air at close to the top speed of light at any given moment. Those signals, like TV and radio signals, are constantly moving through your body. Right at this moment, as you read this book, there's enough money passing through you to keep you in clover for the rest of your days. Nice affirmation. The only problem is that the money isn't yours, but that's just a minor technicality. The fact is, it is there. You are close to the goal. All it takes for it to become yours is for you and your actions to agree with that affirmation. Of course, you could win a lottery, but most people believe that but most people don't believe that they can do that. However, in any lottery, there has to be a winner. Deciding that that person should be you sets you ahead of others who you can be sure have agreed with themselves that their chances of winning are remote. I know a woman in Maryland who needed a lot of money quickly. She bought Miracles, a little book I wrote that shows you how to lay out a miracle action plan. And she visualized and affirmed and followed the plan. Now, this lady must have agreed with her inner self that it was time for her situation to change. For on the same day that she wrote out her plan, she bought a $30 worth of tickets for the Maryland lottery. The lottery officials called her a few days later to congratulate her on winning first prize. I don't remember exactly how much she won, but the figure of 1,700,000 sticks out in my mind. Mind you, 1.7 million sticks out in anyone's mind. I met her again a couple of months after her win and asked her how she did it. She told me that she had been affirming her abundance for some time, that the miracle action plan served as a focus of her energy, and that as she decided to buy the tickets, she agreed to win. Better still, she knew she had won. Now, this lady was very unusual. For most people who need money, allow their emotions arising from their lack to swamp them into negative patterns that only confirm that lack. But in spite of the fact that her situation looked desperate, she did not buy into the desperation. Instead, she bought into the solution. Interestingly enough, the other day, shortly after I started to write this book, a person whom I'd met at a seminar in Colorado called me. She said she had a dream in which she had dreamed the winning numbers in the Arizona lottery. The next day, she drove from Colorado to Arizona to buy her tickets. On the way over, she changed her mind about the last two numbers in the dream, and instead of backing the dream numbers, she opted for 3 of the numbers in her dream and 2 others. The numbers in her dream won. The prize winners each got 800,000. She got nothing. I asked her why she had not invested an extra dollar in the dream numbers. She did not know. In talking to her, I genuinely felt that she could do it again, and I told her so. But I also could tell from the conversation that although intellectually she accepted the idea of being rich, her inner mind did not agree with the idea, so it constantly sabotaged her efforts. Sometime in the past, she must have agreed with herself that poverty would be her perpetual state, so her actions were constantly bent on ensuring that to be fact. Yet, we are all interconnected by one energy. Jung called it the collective unconscious. Others might say that it is spirit or the grace of God, but that connection is there. All information is available to us through inner knowing, and there is hardly a person alive who has not had an ESP experience at some time or other in his or her life. Now, rather than seeing your dead granny drifting through the hallways of your house, why not agree with yourself that the next ESP experience you should have, let it be a money-making proposition? It's not that hard, but you'll have to get used to backing your hunches. What does it matter if you are wrong? How many times have you had a terrific intuitive feeling and then kicked yourself when you did not follow through? I have always had a great love for horse racing, the sport of kings, they call it. The problem is it takes a king's ransom to sustain one's interest. In any race, there is absolutely no logical reason why any particular horse should win, but one will, and that one horse is included in the runners and riders. So discovering it is not an impossibility. Now, wherever you back a horse because you think it's going to win, you enter a crapshoot in which anything can happen. The problem is you can't talk to a horse and say, "Oi, mate, are you up for it today or not?" Yet every so often you'll be lounging at the paddock watching the horse parade, and suddenly you will know which horse is going to win. There is something about that horse's energy that has winner embossed on its backside. It's a wonderful feeling that happens, for it is the only time that your money is not at risk. Plus, whenever I get one of those inner flashes, I like to hang around where the punters are placing their bets and watch their emotions flip-flop them into the wrong decisions. Of course, the reason why most people lose is because they feel that they don't have enough money, and those emotions serve to separate them from what money they do have. The only gamblers I know who are successful are those who are well off in the first place, who are able to emotionally and financially sustain a number of losses in order to make a profit. Of course, the other way that you can acquire lots of money quickly is to find it. Every moment of every day, vast sums of money are lost. Much of that money is sooner or later found. All you have to do is set it up in your mind that you are open to finding money and that you agree to allow your intuition to place you always in the right place at the right time. Bit by bit, money starts to find you. In the metaphysical dollar dance of life, money is only energy. All money is part of the God force and therefore free. So, in theory, money is free. What tramps money is the mind and emotions of those who own it. When it drops from their possession in some way, it is liberated from their emotions and it returns to the source. If you truly see yourself as an infinite part of all things, you are that source. A man I worked with once entered a phone booth on a busy street in London. As he dialed his call and placed his money in the slot, he found that his coin was bent. Having no other coins in his pocket, he crossed the road and got some change at the paper shop. Some minutes later, when he finally returned to the booth, he found to his surprise that someone had left a suitcase there. There was no name tag on it, and my friend was in a hurry. So he just tossed the suitcase in the back of his car and continued with his day. When he got home that night, he opened the case to see if he could identify its owner. It was £250,000 in cash and nothing else. When I agreed with myself to accept all the money that the universal law had to offer, I went through a dramatic change in consciousness. First, I had to agree that I was worthy of receiving free money. Second, I had to know that it was okay to get money without any effort at all. By then, I had gone beyond the idea that money only comes from working hard. Further, I opened myself up to receiving money by constantly picking up all the money that I found. In the first few months of this new affirmation, I found 6 purses. On one occasion, I was standing on the corner of a street in London. A taxi came around the curb and a lady's handbag came flying out of the window. I hollered to the occupants, but they never heard me. I didn't make large sums at this, for if a purse had a person's ID, I always returned it. But I did get to date some interesting ladies, all of whom were positively disposed toward me on account of my gallant chivalry. What a handbag routine did for me was to help my mind exercise itself getting ready to accept money. About a year later, $10,000 dropped into my lap. It wasn't found in the street, but it did come by freak chance. I bought a shipment of denim jeans in LA from a clothing broker, and I gave him a check in settlement. The jeans were shipped to London, and my customer wired me $10,000. I had laid out plus my profit. 3 months later, I noticed that the $10,000 check I gave the broker had not reached my bank. I wanted to know if he had cashed my check, and his bookkeeper confirmed that he had showed me the deposit slip. The broker's account had been credited by his bank, but somehow the check had not reached my bank. Now, if you know anything about banking, you'll know that that's impossible. But that is exactly what happened. It could be that my check was not lost by the broker's bank, but by one of the other banks that may have been involved in processing the transaction. But the final result was the bank somewhere laid out $10,000 on my behalf and did not instigate the paperwork to get it back. Bingo. The universal law delivers $10,000 to the needy from a bank that has so much that the odd $10,000 doesn't matter. Love it. By the way, this incident was the first of many drop in the lap financial gifts that I have received in the last 10 years. You can do the same, even better, once you set yourself into the flow. For the most part, free money will only amount to a small percentage of all money and abundance you receive. Usually, your cash flow will result from earning or working for it. Both take effort, and neither needs to involve struggle. The trick is to see your life in terms of energy. The work you do or the investments you make are part of that overall energy. Thus, the money you receive from those efforts is also energy. By dealing with abundance in energy terms rather than specific dollar values, you open yourself up to receive infinite amounts, for there is no limit to energy. And as energy is abstract to the mind, it is easy for the mind to accept, whereas it is harder for the mind to accept infinite amounts of money as being a real possibility. By following the concepts in this book, you create the metaphysics of money in the total energy of what you are: mind, body, and spirit. Then it becomes simple to develop an ESP about money, for every fiber is attuned to the idea. To refine this, all you have to do is convert energy into cash. This is so you can develop your battle plan for life with all the pleasant qualities of reaching the final goal in the not too distant future, long before you're too old or decrepit to enjoy it. To the flag, ye sons of freedom, to the flag. Tick-tock, the destiny of the masses. In the ordinary world of mechanical man, tick-tock, as I call it, money is the key symbol of survival. If I don't get some money, I don't eat. If I don't eat, I die. It is also a key symbol for the ego, for many evaluate their worth according to what possession or standard of living they enjoy. They buy things that they can show to others, so hopefully others will consider them important or better for having acquired whatever it is that is on display that week. Because the ego's overriding function is to sustain the individual's survival, and because money is one of the guarantees of that survival, it is natural that the ego personality is obsessed emotionally with finances and abundance. Yet it is the emotions we experience around money that cut us off from easily obtaining all that we will ever need. It is the prison we create in our feelings. Our world is abundant. There is a surplus of food, money, and resources. In fact, if the total wealth of the world were divided equally among all the citizens, every man, woman, and child would be a millionaire. Yet we experience lack. Why? Because only a very small percentage of people are free of negative emotions around money, and even fewer have a certainty in their heart that says, I am always in the right place at the right time. Abundance is simple and natural to me, and all of my needs are constantly met. If you were to interview people in the street, you would not find 1 in 100 who would tell you that he enjoyed a surplus, an overbrimming joy in the lushness of things. Each would describe his financial limitation and insecurities by reflecting on his lack or by highlighting the lack he perceived in others. You would hear of the Ethiopians, the dole lines, the unemployed. You have to listen to stories, rising prices, and economic uncertainty. You would hear the ego personality bemoaning its lack of certainty, the absence of guarantees, the frailty of human life. Then you would understand why the world is so troubled by finances and why most never achieve a level of financial security that satisfies them. Abundance will never be a factor of how much money one has. Rather, it is always a factor of how one feels about what money one does have. And because the ego of mechanical man is sentenced to perpetual insecurity, it follows that the proprietor of such a personality can never cross the threshold of uncertainty to a life of peace and calm. It is almost as if, in the anguish of uncertainty, erratic cash flow, and unlimited resources, the ego perpetuates its control over the individual by creating a constant reminder to that person of the potential disaster that is but round the next corner. And having money does not necessarily alleviate the oppression of that prison, nor does it always set people free. So before we look at how you are going to make a great dollop of cash, we ought to look at what you consider freedom to be. And we should also go over one of the two common traps of the wealth. Many of the rich are famous. Many of the rich and famous are as miserable as sin, and their money grants them neither joy nor freedom. Further, their ego trips around wealth make them ugly, and the encumbrance of that wealth, added to the obsessive fears they have about losing it, destroys the joy that ought to be a part of their life. Of course, it is better to be rich and miserable than poor, and neither state is completely satisfactory, and both states fuel the ego, even poverty, which is often a massive ego trip into itself. Of course, people who endorse poverty and believe it is a way of life will tell you that it is not the fault of the poor that they have no money. The blame is always shifted to some outside force that is supposed to have caused the lack. They would have you believe that poverty is a disease you catch, like the clap, that the indigent are helpless victims of an economic nutcracker that has them gripped by some delicate part of their anatomy. For some, that may be true, but for most, they are gripped only by ineptitude and apathy. I do not buy into the disadvantaged people excuse, for I have personally met so many who have dragged themselves up from all sorts of difficult positions and circumstances. If you have nothing, no resources, and few contacts, you are at least not encumbered by too much responsibility, and you hold to yourself the affirmation that from here, everything is up. Often a person will consider himself to be above money and feel so godly or so intellectually superior that he doesn't need to soil his hands with day to day reality. Usually, this type expects the world to keep him sustained, and he is often angry when the system does not recognize his specialness. This is not a book for political discussion, but it seems to me that socialist societies breed in people a state of perpetual helplessness because the government underwrites and guarantees the welfare of the people. Creativity loses its impetus, for it is no longer necessary as a quality in each person's survival. Thus, the system creates a class of people whose only creativity is to invent ways of milking the system. In turn, the drain of this dead weight is billed to those who, through the pride or necessity, actually work. It seems to me that when you rely on another to sustain you, you automatically have to sell your soul into slavery. The exception is perhaps a non working married mother who, through her dedication to the family, accepts a certain loss of financial independence. Without income, you have no freedom. And whereas it might be fun to lounge around for a little while, eventually you have to reconcile your ineptitude and subservience and tell yourself a pack of lies in order to sustain any self worth or image. Eventually, that lack of self worth or self sustaining charisma shows up in your life in various nasty little incidents of negativity that serve to conform the uncomfortableness of things. If you were to unplug the supposedly helpless from the government nipple, you would be amazed to find that everyone would trot off to work the following morning like good uns. For whereas the people have a vested interest in sustaining a theater of hopeless circumstances, they are not necessarily into starving. The problem is that the system that have been developed in Europe and the United States are not easily unraveled. For the people who get the handouts, and there are 38 million of them in the US, are also the voters. No politician can get up on his podium and actually speak the truth. Further, there is a natural tendency for politicians to dish out money willy-nilly. First, it wins votes, and second, it is not their money. But in the end, these socialist societies will fall apart, for the sheer weight of this ever expanding largesse is collapsing the economies of the world. But interestingly enough, it's not the economics of this nonsense that will bring it down. It is the metaphysics and psychology of socialism that will eventually modify the system. Everyone who is currently coddled and sustained knows deep within that they are buying into metaphysical weakness, born out of their thinking by the psychology of helplessness. This eventually creates a society in which people feel that everything is hopeless and that there is no meaning to life. As this vapid and buried emotion emanates from the psyche of the people, it begins to change the outer circumstances of life. People drift into ever deepening spirals of mind numbing apathy, seeking whatever respite they can. Thus, drugs, violence, booze, and casual sex become the only avenues of escape. As morality changes our society's decay, and eventually there is no way to alleviate the people's discontent, the discomfort is self perpetuating. For the life sustaining excitement and charisma that would allow them to feel involved, to feel that they had worth, to feel they could contribute to making the world a better place, is not there. Eventually, this lack of release turns into anger. As that anger builds, the society looks outside itself to discover something or someone on which to settle the blame. Eventually, the only way to alleviate anger and discontent of the people is for everyone to go to war. Look at the history of Germany in the 1920s and 30s. The people and its government suffered horrendous economic collapse. It's easy to see why Hitler got off to a flying start. Or look at Iran in the modern day, when the Ayatollah Khomeini could not deliver to the people on an energy level the Islamic heaven he had promised. The only other option was to release the frustration by going to war with the neighbor, Iraq. War serves several functions. First, it acts as an enema for the discomfort and anger people feel. Second, it distracts everyone from the failures of their leaders. Third, it gets everyone involved. And finally, life takes on a new meaning as people discover their worth in the heroism of disaster. Added to that, the society and its economy is destroyed, which creates a dandy excuse for the government. Everything can begin again, somewhat bruised, but afresh and anew. Now, you may say that this cannot possibly happen, but the fact is that it is happening, and the final conclusion is but a few years away. For when you entrap the people with the firewater of socialism, the economy comes under such strain that eventually the system destroys itself. It is better, therefore, that you decide to become independent and self-supporting, for not only is it metaphysically correct, but in it lies the secret of true freedom. For the creative endeavors that you must employ to reach that state create around you a life-sustaining energy that will allow you respite and will pull you up out of the destiny of the masses. But you may say, if the world is falling apart and if it's all going to the dogs in a few years' time, what then is the point of making money or of developing anything in particular? First of all, it may not happen if enough people change their minds. Second, the answer lies in the doing of it. Does the daffodil say it won't bother to struggle up through the ground, for it may freeze, and anyway in October its petals will wilt? Plus, it's better to be rich than poor when things fall apart. In bad times, the rich usually get richer. As you commit to your own freedom, the level of discomfort dissipates, and bit by bit you discover a new person, a person who has no need to alleviate his or her discomfort by taking it out on others. Contrary to popular myth, most people survive wars. Only a very small percentage of the population is wiped out. Most Germans survived World War II, as did most of the British, French, Americans, Australians, and others involved. Those who died were souls who had metaphysically finished their current evolution on the earth plane. The rest who died were those who, not being particularly strong or who being particularly thick when it came to reading circumstances, got sucked into the national karma and were overwhelmed by events. Now, you can see the importance of becoming independent and strong. The idea that events happen indiscriminately and that people are just contestants in a lottery of fate is not metaphysically correct. Each drive his own destiny to whatever conclusion fits with his energy level and the quality or lack thereof in his feelings. To say that the victims of the last war were innocently slain is, on an outer level, correct, as many were pulled in through no apparent violation of their own, but each had an inner prompting of which we know nothing. If you accept that you are in control of your life and that the circumstances of that life are directed by whatever energy you put out, then you would also have to extend that concept to those alive in the 40s. What metaphysical forces pulled these people into circumstances that ensured their departure from the physical plane, and what aspects of that same force inspired others to survive, we can never know. But as the world changes over the next few years and the economies of the world unravel, you can be sure that people will invent all sorts of interesting forms of harakiri. Yet within that, you will find others, the vast majority, who will survive, prosper, and do extremely well. The great upheavals of the world are just self-transformational seminars that are a lot of very unconscious people are forced to attend so that they look at their lives under pressure. If you do not change, reality in the end forces the change upon you. But the ego personality hates it. If the salt and pepper shakers switch positions and are now at the other end of the table, my God, what happened? The mind likes things steady and constantly the same. Yet, if you live and are alive to your possibilities, you will know there is more money to be made when things are under pressure than when things are stable. For when things are steady, everyone feels secure and prices remain firm. But once the old clock market tumbles 50 to 500 points a day, everyone is not so sure. And at that point, you can step in and create an alternative reality for everyone by paying them a little less. Yet, if you have worked on yourself and have developed a balance and intuition about life, there is absolutely no reason why you should have to sign up for anything gruesome. In fact, you know on an outer level that your destiny holds a great amount of success and enlightenment, that there is, in fact, no limit to what you can achieve or to the level of freedom you can attain. Which brings me via a circuitous route to an earlier point. You have to look at what you consider to be freedom. To me, the quintessence of freedom is feeling, not a circumstance. If you rely on circumstance to grant freedom, it is unlikely that you will ever achieve it. For circumstances constantly change, and the very nature of your seeking freedom in things outside of yourself creates the impossibility of that in your heart. What freedom is to you may be slightly different from what freedom is to another, but certain aspects of freedom are common to all. To be free, you have to be fluid in your lifestyle. There must be a few encumbrances in life as possible. Whatever encumbrances you have accepted have to be joyously taken on by you. You will have to have money. How much money depends on what you intend to do with your life and on the various aspects of your personality. But basically, you need enough cash so that life is not a pain in the neck. And what financial level you cross the pain in the neck line depends on you. To some, the pain in the neck line rests at 1,000 a week. For others, nothing less than 10 grand a month will do. For a third, $1 million a year is a tight squeeze. The name of the game is to simplify your life to such an extent that the pin line is reduced so that your emotions around money rest in a constant state of comfort and balance. Speaking of the pin, it is interesting that the number that the bank gives you to operate the cash machine on the brick wall is also called the pin. I wonder why. I finally came to the conclusion that it was called pin because the number is a pain in the neck to remember. At my bank, if you punch in your pin incorrectly 3 consecutive times, the machine presumes you're a crook and eats your card. The next day, you have to attend personally and beg your card back. Anyway, it won't be long before you won't need all that nonsense. You'll have all sorts of 10,000 swishing around, and you won't have to go through the degrading performance of begging a brick wall for $20. Once you reach that level, you will feel about abundance and finances that take on a different hue. Because you have detached from the struggle of money and because you are no longer deeply involved in the survival mode of tick-tock. The psychic forces within you that constantly push money away rest. In your mind, you click money from a symbol of survival into a symbol of freedom. Suddenly, opportunities flow, money comes effortlessly, and others, seeing your composure, come around to discover how it was that you achieved that. And when they show up, bill them. The point is that there is no amount of money in the world that will make you comfortable if you are not comfortable with yourself. And if your life is so piled high with stuff, whether it be attitude stuff, obligation stuff, or just stuff, there is no way you will ever be able to breathe freely. If, from the point at which you find yourself today, you cannot walk away right now, then you are not really free. If your obligations are such that they become a major part of your emotional activity, you are not free. If you have difficulty sustaining a lifestyle or position, you have trapped yourself. It is better that you live in one room with a leaky roof than live in a large house, the mortgage payments of which are causing your colon to turn cancerous. To be stuck in tick-tock exposes you to the destiny of the masses. It bothers me to tell you this, but when things change, and they will, if you are not free by that time, the system will eat your lunch. That is why the trick to money is having some. For with a certain amount of cash, you can dampen down whatever debilitating emotions exist. And you know that the money you do have is an affirmation that you have created it in the past and can do it again in the future. The rich get rich not only because they have surpluses with which to invest, but because of the overriding emotional release they have experienced from having wealth. Even if you do not have any money to speak of, you can create for the mind the illusion that what you do have is overwhelming abundance. The mind is pretty dumb, and often it can't tell the difference between illusion and reality. You can test this. Close your eyes and imagine that you are eating a very sour lemon. Your mouth will begin to salivate in spite of the fact that there is nothing in it. In a similar fashion, you can get your mind to agree that abundance is natural, that there will always be enough because what you have right now is enough. Once you have talked yourself into this idea, the rest is just plain sailing. The inner energy of the world is infinite, as in your inner mind. You exist on an inner level in a perpetual state. Thus, if what you see around you is not okay, then you create in your feelings the idea that you are perpetually not okay. Everything goes. Therefore, to endorse that viewpoint, if you see the world as lousy, you take on the hue of its infinite lousiness. Conversely, if you see your life as fine and abundant, even if it is not so, and even if you see the world as a happy and wonderful place to be, it becomes so. You then detach from the more severe forms of survival anxiety that the mind creates. Suddenly, you enter a personal and private heaven in which all is beauty and light. Now, at first, you will have to kid the mind that this is so, but eventually, of its own accord, it selects from all the possible circumstances of life events that correspond to that energy or feeling that accentuates the joyous, liberating part of life and pulls you away from ugliness and lack. We live in incredibly heroic times. Looking back, we will see these days as the most powerful, evolving, interesting, and spiritually rewarding times in the history of man. There is more creativity and art than ever before, more opportunity, more capital and finances, more action than ever before. There are more people clunking around on the physical plane than ever before, and many of them are as sick as dogs. The world has never been sicker. So if you're a healer, you can be up to your armpits in people who are conking out all over the place. If you are in finances, there is money swishing around, 1 billion per minute. If your interest is music, there are more orchestras, record companies, record recording studios than you can ever get around to. Whatever your interest, now is the time. It baffles me how people see lack in society when there is so much of everything. It reminds me of the guy who got locked in a bakery and died of starvation. It makes no sense. The level of sophistication is fantastic. For example, in the olden days, if you wanted to sell some shares, your broker had to run to the floor of the exchange, find the jobber, and transact your request physically with the little pieces of paper. Nowadays, on the New York Stock Exchange, they have the ability with computerized trading to transact 550,000 share trades, not shares, trades in 3 seconds. You are looking at a market that is so sophisticated, it is open all around the world 24 hours a day. You can be making a royal fortune while you are snoozing with a loved one or two. Any time of day or night, you can sit bolt upright and holler, sell zinc, and someone somewhere will sell it for you. It might have to be Kuala Lumpur because it's so late at night, but you can get out of zinc in 10 seconds anytime. Inside mass consciousness, where most people live, money is a form of the God force, the emotion of which is stronger than any religion or spiritual idea, and often stronger than love or family ties. The overwhelming influence of the emotion of money dominates the people. That is why everyone is tearing around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to get in the money. It isn't usually the money itself that motivates tick-tock. It is the addiction of constantly having to appease the gods of survival. You can probably see this in the past in your own life. You got emotionally involved in a financial deal, or you got strung out waiting for a check to arrive in the mail and it burned you out emotionally. When the deal finally went through, or when the check plopped on your lap, you had little pleasure in it, and you transferred your emotions to the next deal and the next postal delivery. TikTok deals with the surface of the physical plane only, and that is why it is hard to exist solely within it. For whereas the surface may have a lot of good ideas and methods, it is not complete without a metaphysical approach as well. Think of this: if you have done fairly well in the normal rhythm of things, 2 or 3 metaphysical ideas added to all that you already know may be all that you need to put you on top of the heap. It's interesting to me how many of the traditional ways have changed to incorporate a mysticism and a more infinite overview. There's especially, this is especially so in big corporations, where millions are being spent on motivation, consciousness, raising, and leadership skills. People are catching on. All the logic and the technical approach is fine, but that is open to anyone who can pay for the software. A little metaphysics a gives you a head start over the others, and it simplifies your life. The thing about TikTok is that the people in it believe what they see as a reality. They see it as real. That's funny, ludicrously funny. They think that life is serious, and then they look at those little pieces of green paper or whatever color the government is using this year to pretty up the paper and make it look like it might be worth something. And they are prepared to die of cancer to get a pile of it. Now, as you look at the way TikTok deals with the emotions of money, all you have to do is get a little crafty and step back just one pace away from TikTok and tell them to run around like crazies or watch them run around like crazies. The trick is to get out of the most of the emotion, to resonate a strong, steady energy and allow the natural forces of life to bring you all you want. An old bull and a young bull were standing on a hill overlooking a field full of very attractive cows. The young bull said to the old bull, "Let's run down there and hopefully we can grab a couple of those cows and make love to them." The old bull, turning to the young one and smiling, and said, "No, let's walk down and we'll make love to them all. Walk slowly with a steady pace, care for nothing much, watch what is at your feet, project little into the future, and suddenly you begin to live." You don't need $1 million necessarily or a pile of Swiss francs in a hole in order to feel okay. It helps, but it's not vital. All you need is right now is enough to get you through the next 72 hours. You don't need to ask, how will I survive when I get 99? Universal law of abundance will say to you, you're bananas. You're only 18. What are you worried about? Dollar Dance Concept 2. Even if you do not have any money to speak of, you can create for the mind the illusion that what you have is overwhelming abundance. If you have made it in life up to this point, why would you not make it further down the line? Surely you are becoming more aware, more conscious, more crafty, developing a stronger and stronger sense of your identity. If you stay balanced and develop a calm around finances, you are bound to have all the money you will ever need. There may be harvest, and other times will be for planting and may be more sparse, but that is natural. You can agree right now that you will never have to put out another thought about money ever again, for it is not real. It is not scarce. It is not negative. It is just little pieces of colored paper and complete nonsense. But TikTok believes in it. In reality, there is no limit to how many of those little bits of paper you can have. All you have to do is get in the flow and agree with your inner self that the idea is compatible. Chapter 3: Pulling People Through Acceptance. The ego seeks approval. People seek approval. We all come through an educational training where we teach our kids to do little things and we pat them on the head and give them a chocolate. Did I do okay, mommy? Sure, you did okay. Pat, pat. The family is where the ego learns to look for approval. And then, as the person grows up, he or she goes out into the world to win the approval of everyone else. The ego is influenced by everything and everyone else's wants. Why? Because it's stupid. Why would I fall for a stunt like that? But it does constantly. We want you to do this and that. Otherwise, we won't love you. We want you to do the dishes. You mean I have to? Yes, we want you to do the dishes. What? Today? No, every day. Well, just one dish? No, 299 of them every day. For a week? No, for the rest of your life. That's what I have to do in order for you to love me? Yes. Once you prove that to us, that you are stupid, we'll agree to love you. The male version goes like this. We want you to bolt out the door at 10 till dawn, belt up down the freeway, pressurize yourself totally stupid for 19 hours a day with all sorts of concepts about working hard, drag home enough buffalo or cash or moolah so we'll feel safe. Then if we feel safe and secure because of the sheer amount of buffalo you haul home, then we'll love you. So the male ego goes, "Oh, all right." And off he trudges and dies. And they say Harry died on the freeway, age 42, 3 buffalo on the backseat. The point is that we are constantly trying to win people's approval because we're not taught to grant ourselves our own approval. In doing so, we usually spend a lot of cash frantically buying things and giving money away, hoping that somehow these actions will make us okay. I noticed that in Australia, the average male is wrapped up with the good idea that people should consider him a good bloke. In trying to win people's approval, he gives away some of his power and it exposes him to being manipulated. Either people accept you or they don't. You did not come here to be manipulated. Just to keep people happy, what you are is what you are. You can change it, but first you have to accept it, for it is the truth. In accepting yourself, you don't have to get into a huge ego trip, but you do have to come to the point of being satisfied with who you are. None of us is perfect, otherwise, we would not be here. The very virtue of the quest is that much of it lies ahead. But as long as you are making progress, you can settle into the fact that you don't have it all together. You can be happy that sometimes you arrive late, or that occasionally you have let people down, or that your checks bounce, or whatever. Yet we tend to let ourselves get sucked into other people's opinions and we buy into what they think we should be. So the next time you bounce the rent check on the landlord, instead of feeling rotten and listening to all the things he or she might have to say about your flakiness, just smile sweetly, shrug, and say, aerobic checks. They bounce around a lot. You are internal, immortal, and infinite. The fact that you can't count is just a minor aberration. Once you can accept yourself and feel comfortable with that, then the world accepts you. And when your checks bounce, they'll make excuses for you, saying it probably wasn't your fault. It is only when you feel insecure about who you are that other people don't like you. Have you ever wondered why? Because basically, people who don't accept themselves are very insecure. That insecurity is projected and others react negatively. It reminds them of their own vulnerability. You can see this clearly in people who play victim. They put out a constant poor me energy, hoping to win people's affection by twanging their emotions. Yet, victim as a theatrical role doesn't work. For while someone is telling you this week's crop of horror stories, you often find yourself becoming more and more angry. You feel like smacking them in the mouth, saying, here, let me help you. Let me jump on your head. Let me slap you in the eye with this wet haddock. Now, how do you feel? Happy? Are you? It's only 9:15. I could probably arrange another assault by lunchtime. That any good to you? In order for you to become wealthy, you're going to have to become good at accepting things. Very good. By accepting yourself, that becomes easier. Of course, there are loads of very rich people who do not accept themselves for 1 minute. But what is the point of having money and not having a settled life? I have never seen the reason for all the guilt trips and inadequacies that people go through. I can see why they go through it and how it came about, but I feel that they ought to give themselves an even break. It is not that hard to back off. Buying into whatever anyone else says you should do disempowers you. It serves as a constant reminder that you are not in control of your life. It's better. Therefore, you go out of into the world, live on your own, away from social pressure, and make loads of silly mistakes that you live in a close knit community in which you allow yourself to be trapped by the attitudes of all the people around you. It may be that the advice you receive is good advice, but it's important that you make that advice yours. It has to be what you want, and it has to come from your ideas and lifestyle, not from the motivations of others. Once you get centered and discover who you are and are happy with that, you begin to pull out of the general destiny of the world. You become a true individual, driving your own metaphysical bus, so to speak. That is vitally important. For the world of tick-tock is heading for a brick wall. And if you just follow along like a moron, you rest inside the collective destiny rather than inside a fresher, more liberating destiny of your own. It allows you to instigate change in your life without the interference of others. It is you freeing yourself up to change yourself. What usually occurs in the ego personality resists change. Then it has no emotional fortitude for that change. When it eventually happens, often the ego personality will have such a vested emotional interest in the status quo that it feels that the status quo is itself. Then, if reality changes or collapses, its life collapses with it. So you see stockbrokers swallow diving off high rises when the market falls. In the dollar dance of life, acceptance is the key issue for the most. It is the block that holds so many back. Its psychic undercurrent slows their progress to a crawl. Once you can accept yourself, then you can begin to look at the level of acceptance you offer to others. The subtlety here is not to create an abrasive attitude toward the actions of others, even if you do not agree. For as you put out negative aggression, it ruins your own fluidity and flow. You can't spend 20 minutes raving about how rotten your neighbor is without that criticism becoming a part of your own reality. The inner you, existing as it does as a part of all things, has difficulty differentiating between you and your neighbor. It has a tendency to believe that what you're saying about another is, in fact, what you believe about yourself. Dollar Dance Concept 3: Acceptance of self is the foundation of receiving. So, in the same way that you ought to give yourself an even break, you should offer those around you an even better deal, for they may not have the advantage of being in a living genius like you. Further, it's a training in self acceptance to allow everyone to be as silly as they want for as long as they want. Soon you become more tolerant of your own shortcomings. Acceptance is the foundation of receiving. It is also the way that you pull people to you. For when you can accept yourself and others, a calm exists all around you. That energy exudes an unusual power. People are fascinated by it. They feel secure within it and are automatically drawn to it. By being liberal with others, you liberate yourself. Then, in order for you to crank up your level of financial activity, you will have to open to receiving. You will have to ensure that there is no part of your intellect or of your inner self that is against it. The guy who wrote that it is more blessed to give than receive was the fellow who was getting it. The internal inner reality. There is no difference, neither is higher nor lower. Both giving and receiving is energy and flow, but it is all part of the same energy. What one has done is just to shift somewhere. Imagine it like this: if you took 1 million gallons of water out of the ocean off the coast of California and took it to the north and dropped it back in the ocean off the coast of Seattle, it wouldn't make any difference to the total or to the quality or the nature of the water in the Pacific Ocean. Even if you dropped 1 million gallons of Seattle itself, it wouldn't make a lot of difference. The citizens there are used to it. It's the only place in the world where the clouds hover at 0 altitude and the rains fall from the ground up. The point is that if you accept that there is only one energy in all things, then on an energy level, there is no giving or receiving, just energy moving around within itself. It is only the ego that sees a separateness in things. So the ego will say, the Cadillac went to Harry, to Sally. The Cadillac went from Harry to Sally. But on an infinite level, it is neither Harry nor Sally's. It is a part of all things. It is where it finds itself, and whose name is on the owner's manual is irrelevant. This means that in the infinity of things, all the money in the world is, in effect, yours. At least you can begin to feel that it is. You can open to the idea that it is natural for people to give you money and things. You can invent exercises that help you to understand receiving. By the end of this book, I want you to be so good at receiving that we nominate you for the receiving Oscar of life. It takes practice, but you can start by never turning anything down. Accept everything and anything you are offered by others. Even if you have no need for the object, take it. You can always toss it out later or give it to someone else who is in the receiving training. That's important as you accept a gift or favor or money. Watch how you react. See if you can take that energy or that thing graciously and naturally. Or if you react with emotional embarrassment, see if your reaction is an open or closed one. So the next time one of your mates offers you a psychedelic fluorescent tie with a nude on it that moves when you move, rather than thinking, shall I throw up now or later? Accept it. Realize that it isn't the tie that is important. It is your ability to take things as they come along. It is an affirmation that you are worthy of gifts, that you are open to receive. But you have to be consistent so that the various parts of yourself are not tugging in opposite directions. Agree to accept all the money that comes your way. That means that you can't see a penny on the sidewalk and walk past it. You will have to be consistent in your affirmation and pick up each and every penny you find, even the horrible ones that are stuck to the pavement with chewing gum. The reason for this is that the collective unconscious, or universal law, as I like to call it, is not aware of value. If you affirm, I am abundant, money comes to me, and then see a penny in the street and can't be bothered to pick it up, the message you put out by your action is not in sync with your affirmation. Thus, you disempower your abundance consciousness. Now, sometimes picking up a penny, especially when you are with other people, can be embarrassing, for they don't do things like that. They're much too important to accept something for nothing. But the fact that it is embarrassing is excellent training, for you have to go past the idea and act for yourself, not in accordance with what others might think. Some years ago in London, I was entertaining a group of very important business folk from the US. I had decided to take them to the ballet at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. I thought this would be a nice, swanky way of showing them the top of the line. Now, in those days, I had been banned from driving for having too much blood in my alcohol stream. So I had bought a Rolls and hired a chauffeur to get around the transport problem. I had arranged for the driver, Slick Vic, we called him, to wait at my curb directly outside the opera house so that at the end of the performance, I could whisk my guest off to the late night dinner. A table for 5 had been reserved at the Trattoria Castellato. Well, as we came out of the opera house, crowds milling, guest in tow, I began to cross the sidewalk to the car. There to my left was a penny. It had been raining that evening, so the penny shone, reflecting the street lights and the shadows of those lights, flickering as they did through the crowd, giving the momentary impression that the coin was, in fact, winking, taunting me to walk past it. I hesitated, wondering what everyone would think as I groped around at their feet. Then I decided that an affirmation is an affirmation, so I went for the penny. The problem was I was a little half-hearted, and instead of just bending down and picking the damn thing up, I did a kind of bunny dip, which entails keeping your back straight, bending your knees, and dropping your hands slightly behind you. The maneuver was taught to waitresses at the Playboy Cup as a way of setting drinks on a table without having customers looking down their cleavage. I can't remember who taught it to me. Deep in the back of my mind, there is a faint, fond memory, but something must have been lost in the passage of time, for on that night, I got it all wrong. What should have been a graceful scoop turned into a fiasco. I hit the penny with my knuckles and it began a long loping run across the sidewalk, snaking gracefully in and around many an expensive shoe. At that point, I should have left well enough alone, but determined as I was, I refused to give up. I lunged at the intersection, at the inherent coin, and missed, winding up on all fours. That night, I had chosen to wear a white satin suit. God knows why. By the time I finally had the penny in hand, I had acquired most of the muddy water on that particular sidewalk. Meanwhile, Slick Vic had ushered my guests into the car, and they relaxed to my pantomime with restrained astonishment. I was really embarrassed. And once in the car, I felt I had to offer an explanation. So I told my American friends that the penny routine was an ancient British custom that brought untold amounts of good fortune. They were fascinated to learn the ins and outs of the British culture, and one of them even began taking a few notes. All was well until he started to pin me down as exactly how the penny in the gutter routine entered British folklore. At that point, I went completely over the top. I told them it was a custom handed down from Elizabethan times. To make it real, I created a whole fantastic scenario with Elizabeth and Lord Dudley. I even slug in Walter Raleigh out of politeness, thinking that perhaps my guests were none too familiar with Dudley exploits. It wasn't long before I had Queen Elizabeth, Lord Dudley, and Walter Raleigh crawling across the floor of Hampton Court in the chase of the royal penny. Everyone was duly impressed with my knowledge of the more obscure parts of English history, as I was myself. I somehow felt that I had created a historic moment, returning the penny in the gutter to its rightful place among the glories of the English-speaking people. You can see it. 1558, Elizabeth ascends the throne of England. 1559, the penny in the gutter enters English history. Notes taken, events chronicled, the conversation drifted to silence. As the roles glided slightly through the night, taking us to our rendezvous with fettuccine linguine and Chianti Classico, I thought about the events of the evening. I must say that secretly I felt proud of myself, damn proud. From time to time, I sorbet, opened my hand to glimpse the great muddy prize, while I amused that there is no limit to the abundance when you are committed to going for it. The reason why training yourself to receive is such a spiritual experience is that it forces you to open yourself up and allows you to think that there is, in fact, a limitlessness to all things. Think of it like this: if you are prepared to open up, you will gradually express more and more energy. And as you express more and more energy, your gift to the world becomes greater. For as you give of yourself, you offer the world courage, inspiration, and a joyously happy outlook. As that energy goes from you and is all allowed to mix with whatever the circumstances of the people gathered around you are, things naturally improve. It follows then that as a representative of the light, you will be entitled to get an equal, if not greater, amount of energy back. To those who have, more is added. Now, that energy coming back to you might be in the form of love, opportunity, and or just the good feelings that people have towards you. But some of that energy will be hard cash, and that's neat. However, you have to be able to graciously accept all that is coming to you, never limiting what you are prepared to receive. In tick-tock, we tend to quantify things by what they are worth. This is a natural byproduct of the logical mind. So we say, this plumbing job is worth $200. But as you start to see yourself and your actions as energy, and that as energy has worth, meaning an expansive, positive, limitless quality, there is no reason why you can't have someone pay you $5,000 to fix their leak. Now, this may seem to you unlikely, but if it does, it just means that you're still somewhat programmed into structural thinking. It is only a matter of breaking you out and allowing you to see greater possibilities. When I first started to work in 1964, I got a job as a gopher mailboy with a firm of shipbrokers in London. My gross pay was £10 per week. That's $17 at today's exchange rates. From that, I had to deduct 1.75 pounds tax and 1.7.50 for travel, 1.50 for food, and £1 a week to have my business suit dry cleaned. My takeaway home pay was £4.25 a week for 40 hours. At that time, British rock and roll stars earned about 1,000 per night. That was the equivalent of 2 years' pay to me. And I remember thinking what an untold fortune it was. I considered singing lessons. The problem was that I'm tone deaf, and two, I sound like a frog in a bag. But my lack of singing abilities was not what held me back from the magical thousand a night league. My problem was that I could not, at that age, feel that I had energy to offer for which anyone would pay substantially. My mindset was limited to £4.25 a week or thereabouts. I needed time to mature and to grow in my thinking. Since my job was in the heart of the financial district of London, I got caught up in the feel of commercial activity. On my lunch hour, I would stand outside the Bank of England or the stock exchange and watch all the important folk coming and going. I followed the stock market day by day, even though there was no way I could afford to buy even a single share. But I was joined in my feelings, even though my current reality was far from that world. It wasn't long before I realized that business, not singing, was the place for me. I left my job in the city, and in less than 1,000 days, I had formed my own business, and I was generating about $20,000 a week. I began to meet many of the famous British pop stars, and I remember wondering how the poor devils got around on just $1,000 a night. I was still a couple of months short of my 21st birthday, but it wasn't all plain sailing from there. It took almost 15 years for my mind to accept abundance as natural. I had times of fantastic success in which I wallowed in lush and flush, and there were other times where I experienced excruciating difficulty and tremendous financial troubles. But in the bad times, I always kept my mind on the dream. And even though I was often being chased by a band of irate creditors, I always held a positive outlook. I'll never forget the morning the man from the courts came around. I had been out with my mates, lurking and cavorting till dawn. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Dazed, I staggered to the door and opened it. There was an official looking bloke with a bunch of documents in his hand. In those days, court writs were wrapped with red string, and it was the glimpse of that very same string that put me instantly on my guard. Mr. Wilde, said the bailiff in a sonorous tone. But before he could utter another word, which no doubt would have contained a litany of complaints and details of who was suing me for what, I interrupted. That bastard, I said. He's run away owing me 3 months' rent. The electricity hasn't been paid, and there are £300 of long distance calls on the phone bill. The man from the courts began to commiserate with me, saying how irresponsible people had become nowadays. I eventually invited him in for a cup of tea. We chatted for about the ins and outs of the British legal system, and the bailiff told me that serving complaints on people was not a well paid job. Well, I said, if you find that bastard Wilde, I'll give you £50 if you tell me where he is. The bailiff was delighted with the possibility of some financial advancement, and he promised due diligence in his search. I saw him to the door, and slipping an extra chocolate biscuit in his pocket, I wished him all the luck in the world. Meanwhile, my mates who earlier had passed out in the various locations throughout the apartment began to congregate in the kitchen. I told them the story of the bailiff, and we all fell about laughing. Somehow, even in the negativity of learning about abundance, there was never a dull moment. The point is that it takes time to crank into your thinking up to where it will accept greater possibilities. And it is important for you not to focus on any negative setbacks. It is so easy to have one's confidence shattered by early reverses. And often those reverses become more real than they ought to be. The name of the game is to see your defeats as seminars you paid to attend to learn the game of life. It's heartening to note that many millionaires have gone bankrupt at least once or twice before they hit the jackpot. The fact that you have the courage to step out and commit to the campaign means that from time to time you are bound to suffer setbacks. That is just the way things are. It will come right in the end. You have a lot of patience and tenacity to hold on while the universal law delivers. It's like planting seeds. If you come back a week later, you would get the impression that nothing was happening, but you have to allow the energy to build and grow. And as it is an esoteric energy, you will not necessarily have an outer evidence that it is working. Learn to trust and keep your emotions out of it. Meanwhile, work on altering your mind to accept more. The trick to money is having some.